let's talk about the BBC now, because it has been revealed that we all have to pay 170 quid basically now for our TV licences, and those people who can't afford them or sometimes don't even get round to paying for them. You know the way it is. BBC, it turns out, has spent £169 million of taxpayers' money, licence fee payers' money, to chase and target TV licence dodgers or just people who haven't claimed. It's got to stop doing this. This is a waste of money. It's obsessed with people paying their TV licence fee because that's its business model. That is getting from us, the people, 3.5 billion quid a year of free money, and if they don't get that, they fear for their existence. So they're very, very hard line on people who don't pay their licence fee. Let's talk to the investigations manager at the Taxpayers Alliance, Joanna Marchong. Hello, Joanna.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
Yeah, I mean, the BBC, every year, almost every day in every way, but it always concedes, yeah, we're going to stop pursuing grannies for non-payment of their licence fee. We're going to stop this hardline stuff because it's not right in a modern world and all that. And yet, every day, every year, we find out they're still doing it. So they spent £169 million chasing and targeting TV licence fee dodgers, people who hadn't paid their licence fee. I mean, when are they going to learn that this is not commensurate with modern times? This is anachronistic. They've got to stop doing this, haven't they?
I think it's absolutely absurd that they're still doing this in the modern times. I mean, you see they've overspent on a contract to send letters, which is such an outdated method to kind of reach public. And I think what also is needing to be clarified is the fact that they're not letters to people they think are dodging the tax or the TV license. It's actually just anyone and everyone. It's people they think could have a TV that aren't paying. They have no clue as to whether these people are even watching live TV or not. I mean, loads of people now are actually spending money on subscription services. So for myself, I have a TV. I don't watch anything live. I watch it all on Netflix. I pay for subscriptions, and that's about it. My TV doesn't have any any other kind of like BBC, ITV, Sky News, anything like that. I mean, we even saw a downturn in the amount of people watching 6 p.m. news every day. And that's to tell you how the trend has changed and their business model is outdated. It's time to scrap the TV tax.
Well, yes, it is. But as I say, why did the BBC, not so long ago, this was a fact, that the BBC was responsible for 1 in 10 magistrates' court cases. Out of the whole nation, the BBC was responsible for 10% of all magistrates' court cases, chasing people who hadn't paid their TV licence, often vulnerable old ladies in particular, for whom the television is their only company. They can't quite afford the astronomical new price of a licence. They end up in court. So the BBC keeps saying, yes, it will sort of cut back on this hardline approach. But it never does it?
No, it doesn't. And as you rightfully said, the people that mostly are targeted in this way and end up in court, end up doing jail time, are old women. It's mostly women that have lost their husbands. Years ago, the BBC licence fee, it would be free for people over 75 years old, and now they've had a policy change. So it's very plausible that these older women and older people in general haven't really realised that the policy has changed, and now they have to opt into a service. If you go on the government website, they're saying that you can get money off. However, it's again something that they have to go out of their way to do when the policy has changed from what it initially was. So it's making it harder for them. And it's kind of almost giving the BBC something to do. I mean, they're targeting these people. They have a stat saying that they're chasing down the money that they're owed, when really they're just hiding the fact that it's an outdated business model that needs to be renewed. It needs to be changed. And it's not working anymore. They should move to a subscription service where people opt in to watch their content.
So there's a logistics company called Wasteful. and they also use the Royal Mail. So the BBC paid this logistics company £33.8 million a year for 5 years to deliver letters to those suspected of not paying. The problem with the BBC is it cannot see a way to go forward into the future without taking money from the people of this country, so that it gets a free 3.5 billion quid every year. The government, I think, the people of this country should say to the national broadcaster, the state broadcaster, this is ridiculously anachronistic. Nowhere else in the world can you face going to prison because you didn't pay for an entertainment show like Strictly Come Dancing. But the BBC cannot envisage existing without this free money from the people. You talk about the subscription service. I might suggest maybe they should think about advertising, but the BBC, I think, should embrace the concept, call me controversial, of making programmes that people want to watch and financing themselves on the back of the popularity of their programmes. And I'll tell you why they don't gather around that revolutionary concept, which is what every other broadcaster has to do, because they have no confidence that they can make programmes that are popular enough to get advertising on the back of. That's their problem.
Exactly. They also have a spending issue. I mean, last week we got presented with a story, and it was in the news, about how the BBC are actually paying for live orchestra concerts for people in prison. So you have a model that actually works out well for them, because they're raking in hundreds of millions of pounds, and they have no kind of consequence onto the whole thing. Sending letters to people, which kind of makes them think that they're going to be criminalised. You're targeting people that are mentally unwell and maybe not realising that, you know, they have to pay this tax. So you're targeting almost the weakest and the oldest in society, just so you can make a quick buck and not really update your methods, which is just a shame, because it's highly immoral.
Yeah. And it is still technically possible, although the BBC said it will never pursue this again, but it is still technically possible to go to jail for not paying your TV licence. And not so long ago, I think it's actually finally stopped, but up until a couple of years ago, there genuinely were only a handful, but a few people would go to jail for non-payment of a TV licence, which basically is, you know, give us 170 quid, then you can watch Strictly Come Dancing or Country File. I mean, the insanity of this is just off the scale. When we were talking earlier, Joanna, about the spending of £33.8 million on this company Whistle to deliver all these letters, that adds up to, if you take that adds up to the cost of 200,000 licence fees. So there's something a bit skewed about the BBC's accounting here.
No, exactly. And ultimately, the people in charge, which are the chief execs of the company, will be taking home hundreds of thousands of pounds every year. And there's clearly some kind of mismanagement. They've got their priorities skewed. It's an outdated model in need of help. And really, the next year, the government should be doing a review. Every time the BBC has had to enact changes, they've been kicking and screaming. So I think this is a way where we've had story after story of how the BBC are mismanaged. And it just means that if the only way to enact change is for them to be kicking and screaming whilst doing it, it's something that politicians and ministers have to endure.
Indeed. And do you, I mean, the BBC executives, you know, they haven't really come up with any kind of plan to go into the future, because the TV licence fee, whether they like it or not, as a business model, is going to die out. Now, it may end up that they want some kind of reduced fee from us, and somehow or other they fund themselves in other ways. Don't forget, they're selling their programmes commercially around the world for enormous amounts of money. I think it's called BBC Lionheart. So they continue to make commercial money. So why can't they expand that subscription service? Why can't they have the courage of their convictions? They like to say, oh, we're so much better than the streaming services. We supply such a great service compared with Netflix. Well, if so, why don't they stand on their own 2 feet and say, as you know, we supply such a great service that we're going out to tender and we're no longer going to require this TV license fee. But they're not going to do that because they don't have the confidence that they can compete with Netflix and Amazon Prime, which frankly these days on a general basis are offering much better programs, much better dramas, much more entertaining fare than the state broadcaster does.
Well, it's as you said, you're completely right, Kevin, because as I said earlier, they should move to a streaming service. However, although they realise that their programs are outdated, they also realise that their clientele is also outdated. Not many people watch the 6 p.m. news anymore. Many people are on the go. They're not sitting down for regular TV time in the evenings and such. You also have the competitors like Netflix, Amazon Prime, you have Apple TV now, and they're all competing in a real market. What's happening now is that taxpayers and BBC license payers are propping up the BBC so they can get away with whatever they want and they're in a comfortable position. Again, there's so many stories where the BBC have just wrongfully used their money and it's unfair. They're a crime-go organisation, so they're majoritarily paid for by the taxpayer. However, we're not subject to license them or to govern them in any sense of the word. They have their own board, they have their own directors, and it's quite frankly unfair that they get all this control and they're under this freedom to kind of fleece Brits whilst reaping all the rewards from it.
Yeah, last point really. You know, the BBC, you know, the Auntie Beeb, it likes to depict itself, portray itself as this sort of benevolent organisation that is looking after the interests of the nation. When you scrape away the surface and you look into the relentless, the ruthless prosecution of anyone who even thinks about not paying their TV licence, the pursuit of them to court, the pursuit of vulnerable old ladies, sticking them in the dock, etc., etc., the benevolent Auntie Beeb image kind of takes a bit of a battering. In this respect, it's a malevolent force trying to fleece the nation, I think.
Exactly. And it's again, we go back to the same point in the story where it's the most vulnerable that are actually being targeted with these license fee payers, with these licensee fees. You have letters going through mailboxes for just the general public. You're never going to have people that aren't suspected of not paying because they have no clue as to who owns a TV, what they're watching, etc. So you're just potlucking and wasting our money whilst doing it. The contract was initially supposed to be £158 million. They're over budget by 11 million, and it's only going to get worse. There's no kind of quota as to whether is everybody paying it. And again, everyone's not going to be paying it because it's completely it's an outdated source of watching the news, watching the television. It needs to kind of change and renew itself. So I hope next year when they have their reviews and it's subject to change, that it really does so, because it's only the most vulnerable in society that are really suffering from it.
Yeah, BBC, middle-aged white people pursuing an audience, young audience, who don't watch the BBC, barely know what the BBC is, and these middle-aged white people who run the BBC don't really care about the audience that does tune into them, which tend to be middle-aged, middle-class people. They want to get the youth audience. The youth audience has gone, and the BBC will never get it back. Simple as that. Joanna, great to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time. Joanna Marchong there from the Taxpayers Alliance on the fact that BBC is ploughing through 169 million quid's worth of taxpayers' money, of licence fee payers' money, to chase people who can't afford it, can't afford the licence fee payers. It's all wrong, isn't it?